Good morning. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Jane Bemis, and I'm the current president of the League of Women Voters, and we are so excited to see everyone here. Thank you all for coming out on this Saturday morning. This is our very first live event in the last couple of years, and we're so happy to see faces that we haven't seen other than on a screen. Yeah. Thanks for coming out on this beautiful morning. And we have a very important topic to talk about, and looking forward to listening and hearing and asking lots of questions. So thanks again to all of you. And I'm now going to turn it over to Kim Ritter, who is a part of the league and who has put together this event. Thanks, Kim.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming out, and welcome to Building a Sustainable Future in Long Beach. As Jane said, my name is Kim Ritter, and I'm the Acting Sustainability Director for the Long Beach Area League of Women Voters, and I chair the League Sustainability Committee. The mission of our committee is to keep our members informed about issues related to the environment, sustainability, and climate change, issues such as California's comprehensive plan for tackling microplastics, and the implementation of SB 1383, the Green Waste Law, here in Long Beach. We also produced a home sustainability guide, which you'll learn more about later in the program. And at this time, I'd like to recognize and thank our committee members for their work in organizing today's event. Jan Gallup, Rebecca Bahar, Marissa Filatovich, Tasha Thrift, and Phyllis O'Connor. I am very happy now to introduce our first speaker, Representative Alan Lowenthal of California's 47th District. I feel like among this crowd that you hardly need an introduction, but in celebration of your long and dedicated career in public service, I'm going to remind everybody of your many accomplishments. While continuing to teach community psychology at California State University, Long Beach, starting in 1969 through 1998, Congressman Lowenthal successfully ran for Long Beach City Council in 1992, where he served for 6 years. He then continued his leadership in Sacramento, first serving 3 terms as a state assembly member and then 2 terms as state senator. As a city council member and then as a state legislator, the congressman fought against the then commonplace public and private sector belief that environmental protections and economic success at the ports of Long Beach and Los Angeles were mutually exclusive. His landmark environmental legislative efforts helped lead the 2 adjacent ports to becoming the cleanest and greenest ports in the world, while remaining the busiest and most successful container ports in the Western Hemisphere. The green business model advocated by the congressman and instituted by the 2 ports has become a role model for ports throughout the world. While a state assembly member and as founding member of the Assembly's bipartisan caucus, he paved the way for creation of California's first ever independent citizens redistricting commission, which took the power of redistricting out of the hands of politicians and gave it back to the people.
Bravo!
And while this wasn't in the official biography that was provided by his office, I'd also like to note that Congressman Lowenthal has been a longtime champion of equity for women and rights for the LGBTQ community. Also a very good friend to the League these many years. During his decades-long tenure as City Council member, California legislator, and U.S. Representative, Congressman Alan Lowenthal's dedication to common sense bipartisan solutions earned him a reputation among his colleagues and constituents as one of the most respected and effective legislators in Long Beach, Sacramento, and the U.S. House of Representatives. Please join me now in welcoming Congressman Lowenthal to the podium.
I'm still sensitive to the virus, so I'm going to be very, try to be protective. And I'm one of those that will still wear until we kind of get this down on air transportation and other kind of transportation, and as much as possible when I'm in crowded venues. especially like when I'm in the floor halls of Congress, where people are coming from all over the country, and it becomes a super spreader event in the hall. So, my little kind of beginning about that. You know, I'm Alan Lowenthal, and I'm really glad to be here, and I want to welcome everybody, and I'm really pleased to hear that this is the first meeting after the pandemic where we're all together and not on Zoom. Good. I'm glad that you invited me to be part of your beginning and your first kind of meeting. And I'm also so pleased to see my dear friend Sharon Weissman. Sharon and I go way back. I'm not going to say how long, but back to the days of Labachi. If any of you know, some of you were laughing, you know what Labachi is. Labachi was the Long Beach area citizens involved, and that's where many of us kind of cut our teeth and became involved in wanting to bring about change in Long Beach. And actually, it is there that I work with from the legal, so Barbara Showag, and we were both the co-chairs, Barbara and myself. Oh, there she is. Yes, and when we worked together and with many others on the first attempt to create an independent, to create a citizens oversight of the police department. So it's kind of with the league that I cut my teeth, a lot of it, in my first and the kinds of activities. You know, we're here today, and I was asked to talk today about climate change, to talk about urbanization, the role of pollution, infrastructure, and so, and as we all know in this room, that these are challenges, tremendous challenges as we try to deal with sustainability in our region. But I'd like to preface my remarks by saying I'm so pleased to be from Southern California in Congress, because this region is today and has been dedicated to using these challenges as opportunities for a more sustainable and resilient future. Not that we've solved everything, not that we've done everything, there's still lots of problems, but people in this room and people in our community and now that we just, you know, Earth Day, we have really committed ourselves to trying to find solutions. And so I'd really like to reward everybody. Building a sustainable future requires that we protect our ecosystems, both here on land, and our rivers and our coasts. Also, we have to protect our air quality, and most importantly, ensure that we're equitably protecting the public health. And I think that's really what we have all learned during this pandemic, that black, brown, people of color, these these minority communities and low-income communities have borne a disproportionate burden of our climate crisis, of our urbanization and pollution. So let's start with that as really what is. While we're going to talk about sustainability, we're going to talk that those are the communities that have borne the brunt and have allowed us to have whatever other protections in other parts of our communities. And so as we move forward, we've got to approach solutions that equitably reduce these burdens and mitigate the previous harms that these communities have endured. But I'm optimistic. While there's much to be done, one, I'm optimistic because people are really committed and trying to do this and not denying this reality. And I believe that there are many opportunities to build sustainability into our systems for the benefit of everyone in our communities. And I think that's really the operating word. We're going to try to do things for everyone now, not just those that vote or those that come from the more affluent communities. About some of the issues that I've worked with that's intertwined with the climate change crisis, which all of you are aware of, is another global crisis that we're facing, one that is now only gathering public acknowledgement as a worldwide crisis, and that's the crisis of plastics. Fossil fuels used to generate plastics greatly contribute to our global climate crisis, and we're seeing the great cost that comes from the throwaway society, which has been built upon single-use plastics and the throwing away of those. For decades, I've been aware of this crisis. I have to give credit to a Long Beach resident for educating me, and that was Dr. Charlie Moore of Al Galita. Charlie, when I was actually at Labachi, before I was even, I worked with Charlie when I was in the state city council and then the state legislature. And Charlie would come back from his trips to the mid-Pacific and he'd say, Alan, I've got to show you these slides of what's out in the Pacific. These tremendous amounts of plastic that are becoming the great plastic dumps, that's out there. And so he is credited for his early research into the Pacific plastic gyre, or what is commonly known as the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. That's really what's out there. This greatly influenced some of my early legislation, my efforts in the California State Legislature, the lead efforts to ban styrofoam packaging, limit plastic bag pollution, and my desire for this only grew when I got to Congress. It was about 4 or 5 years ago, when I was trying to think of, I had promised my son Dan, who is a lawyer and a judge in Long Beach, I had promised him a birthday gift, something special for his birthday. And he said, I want to go to Antarctica. That would be a special gift. And so we did a National Geographic Explorer tour to Antarctica, which the ship was which was a few kind of people like myself who were there and paid, just to learn. Lots of scientists, lots of naturalists, lots of photographers were on the ship. There was only about 100 or so passengers on the ship. And what happened on that ship was shocking. Because when we opened up fish in the Antarctic, or that were killed, or some of the mammals on the, that were attacked by other, you go to the Antarctic, there's no, there are no kind of outposts occasionally where there's a research center, but that's all. And so you're in the most remote place on this planet. And what do you find when you open up fish and you open up other kind of birds and other, you find they're all filled with plastic. In Antarctica, they're all filled with plastic. And that had such a tremendous impact upon me when I came back. I had my staff beginning to work on this issue. What are we going to do? Let's start to work together on this. And at that time, who was still in this United States Senate was Senator Tom Udall. He has since left, and Tom Udall came to me and said, let's work together. Let's put out some research. Let's do a comprehensive package. Let's not just deal with the specific parts. Let's deal with all the upstream. What's producing it? Who's responsible for this? Who's going to pay for it? Right now, many of you spend your time, or frequently have spent your time, whether it's with surf riders or on the beaches cleaning up. Local communities have to pay for that. Have to pay for recycling. That shouldn't be your responsibility. You should always do that. That's your responsibility as a good citizen to do that. But it should be the developers and the producers of this plastic that pay for it, design the systems, and actually are held accountable for the quality of the reusable plastic that's in everything. We should set standards. They should be paying for all of this. We should have plastic buyback, bottle bills. We should make sure that we deal with things such as plastic pellets that get into our sanitation system, that get into fish, and we should not be exporting our garbage to countries in Asia. we need a more comprehensive approach to deal with all of these issues. And working with many environmental organizations, first Tom Udall and myself, and in this past 2 years, it's been a person who really was one of the leaders in the bottle bill from Oregon. I'm talking about Senator Jeff Merkley. We have led the effort in the Senate and in the House of Representatives to do comprehensive federal legislation. It's the most comprehensive legislation that's ever been introduced. And it incorporates many of the things I just mentioned, many of the best practices and common sense policies. It's very ambitious. It takes the responsibility away from individuals and puts it on where it should be, to design these, to pay for these, to make sure that we're doing it, to tell them what they can have, what their plastic, what can be in any of the bottles or plastic wrap. It outlaws all single-use plastics, and it also puts a kind of a moratorium on the development of any new plastic facilities. We're talking about these massive, mega facilities that produce, like if you go out here to the oil facilities, out in Carson, and you look at the refineries, we're talking about plants that are larger than those refineries. That's what's producing the plastic in this country. Estimated that in the next 10 to 20 years, they will use a quarter, if not more, of all the carbon that's produced now, fossil fuels. As we move it away from fuels, the plan is for those large companies to move it into plastics. Well, we've got to make sure that we don't create the same mess that we did with fossil fuels, and in our bill also is, before we do any new plants, that EPA does a study on the public health problems of those plastic facilities. Who is bearing the brunt? Gets back to, you don't have plastic facilities on the east side of Long Beach, in communities like the east side of Long Beach. You have it on what you see in, what would be similar to what's in Wilmington or something. And it's really what you see if you ever go down to the southern part of the United States, into what is really Gasoline Alley, and you go up on the Mississippi to the poorest communities in the country. That's where most of the plastic is being produced, right down there. And so we've got to make sure that before we just allow this to happen, that we not only set limits on what can be done and who's responsible, but we also understand what the impact of that plastic production is, and that EPA does public health studies, and that we put a moratorium in any new facilities until we protect the communities that are going to be most impacted and protect the rest of us. So that's kind of stuff. Since I've introduced this legislation with first Senator Udall and then Merkley in 2020, many of these policies, including the extended producer responsibility, that's where the people who are producing this plastic, making all this money, that they're going to be responsible for the payment by putting minimum recycled content standards into anything that's done, by having state bottle bill updates, by building in environmental justice protections. Just as I mentioned, no new plants in those communities until we find out what the public health impact of those are. We do that before we allow the development of this, not after. We have found now, just in the last 3 to 5 years, that even parts of this bill are being passed in state legislatures and cities throughout the country. That this is not just something that it's hard for states to pass a overall comprehensive approach, but they are passing. This is an issue now whose time has come. And part of it is, those countries in Asia where we were shipping all of this, they don't want it anymore. They don't want this trash in there, and they were doing that for the United States and doing that. They're not going to do this anymore. So it's a time that we deal with it with our own trash. We solve the problem. We stop creating this trash. We stop polluting the environment. And we understand that while it's been a very tremendous benefit, it really, we have to understand what the throwaway society has created, and that we have to begin to put some halt to it and understand where do we need plastics, where don't we need plastics, and begin to have a really thorough discussion as a society about that. And I'll give you some examples. Just last week, the County of Los Angeles became the largest government entity to restrict single-use plastic foodware in restaurants, in stores, in hospital cafeterias, and in food trucks. Starting in 2023, LA County ordinance will require takeout of single-use foodware. It has to be compostable. It has to be recyclable. It's going to require full-service dine-in foodware to be reusable. It bans expanded polystyrene products such as coolers, plates, and cups. This was just passed last week in the County of Los Angeles. So this is occurring. It's an incredible step to reduce the waste stream from the several thousand restaurants and food service establishments in the county. Also, to do that, to build a sustainable future here at Long Beach means moving the dial on policies that are both here and in our nation. Each of you can help to push policies like this, not only at the federal level, but at the state and local level. You can do both. For example, Long Beach has its own climate action adaptation plan. While the county is taking a big step forward, I would be remiss if I didn't mention that Long Beach adopted similar policies 40 years ago. Long Beach continues to make forward-looking decisions when it comes to our environment and addressing pollution. The city has made promising progress on this front by drafting its climate action adaptation plan, which we hope the city will certify in mid-2022. And the Climate Action Adaptation Plan will reduce greenhouse gas emissions, prepare the community for the impacts of climate change, improve the quality of life for Long Beach residents, and enhance economic vitality for our communities. So there's a lot going on. Talking about local communities and infrastructure and investment and trying to make sure that our investments, all of our investments, are sustainable. We last year in the Congress reintroduced one of the few things we've done in a bipartisan way. We introduced community projects, that if communities had projects that were ready to go, that had already passed through a rigorous public process, or they were nonprofits that had strong support, and from those, and there was a public support for these processes, they should be eligible to get some of them should be eligible to get direct funding from the federal government. It's really the money is supposed to be allocated by the House of Representatives and the Congress, but what we've done is abrogate, given up that responsibility to the executive branch to do that. Now, obviously, over 10 years ago, 15 years ago, when they had projects or earmarks before, there were some excesses, and some people use that. The most notable one you frequently heard was the bridge to nowhere up in Alaska. But we didn't have to throw out the baby with the bath. What we could have done is to say, let's make sure we set in place a process that's a public, accountable, transparent process of what we can do, and let's help those community projects. And so here, last year, I was able to get about $7.5 million in community projects. A little under $4 million of those direct funding went to Long Beach. Some of it went to the villages at Camarillo for housing. Some of it went for Silverado Park to actually redo the park facilities for the city. Some of it went to community-based associations, for the African American community, for their development of the new African American museum that's being done. So we were able to do that. Some of the money went into Orange County, because my district, the 47th Congressional District, is Orange County and Long Beach. A little bit under $4 million went right here in Long Beach to those community projects. And I think that, we spent a lot of time asking communities to recommend those projects, to make sure that they've have gone through a rigorous kind of process, and they have public support, and they're ready to go. And so we're now in the process now. Last year we just began it. This year we have now over 40 projects that communities have recommended for us to take a look at, and that meet the criteria of what's going on. And they're going to help us build a sustainable future, is by making sure that those community projects that are ready to go, that have large support. We're going to build upon some of the legislation. I don't need to get into that, but what I do want to talk about, the one piece of legislation that really is part of today's talking about a sustainable future, is that, as I mentioned when I first began, it's very hard to get bipartisan legislation out of the Congress. One of the few pieces of legislation that came out in this session, but was funded this past year, was the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, the IIJA, which most of you don't even know what IIJA means, because I don't even know half the time what IIJA, but it's really known as the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act. Over $1 trillion was passed by both houses and signed by the president for bipartisan infrastructure. It's the largest investment this nation has ever made in its roads, bridges, freight, ports, clean water, broadband infrastructure. That's what it is. Much of it for the electrification process, for electrification infrastructure, and I'll kind of give you some small things about where we are right now. If you look at any reports about where our infrastructure is, the American Society of Civil Engineers says California received a C- on its infrastructure where it is. And that's a good one when you look at where the rest of the country is. So we're at a C-. It's been a long time since I've handed out grades as a faculty member at Cal State, but nobody in my class wanted a C-. That was not a desired grade. So that's not where we want to do when it comes to infrastructure, the backbone of our community. We do not want a C- for our infrastructure. And thankfully, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act will deliver much needed improvements to our state's roads, bridges, waterways, as I mentioned, ports, our infrastructure, our internet. One of the things that what we learned in this pandemic was lots of communities did not have the same access that some of us had to the internet and to infrastructure. They were not wired. Kids, when schools closed, had to go with their parents and drive to parking lots to use access of others. They did not have access. They could not afford it in their homes. That is really the technology that we need to invest in today. Not the only technology, but that technology. And that's when we're talking about equity. That's really where we have to do it. Though every kid has to have access to the internet, and we know those that are most in need are in those communities that have the least access to the internet. In California, there are over 1,500 bridges that are declared as deficient. There's over 14,000 miles of our highways that are in poor condition, and the bipartisan infrastructure law is going to provide California with an estimated $25 billion for federal aid for highway apportion programs, $4 billion additional to replace and repair highways. It's going to be a tremendous amount of money for all the infrastructure on our roads. It's going to upgrade our state's roads. It's going to reduce commute times. It's going to save Californians from all that extra time. As I mentioned, 7% of the bridges in California are considered structurally deficient. The bill provides $40 billion in new funding to replace and rehabilitate bridges in poor conditions, which is the largest single federal investment in bridge replacement in over 50 years in the United States. With over 16% of public transit vehicles in the state past their useful life, California is also expected to receive about $10 billion from the bipartisan infrastructure law to improve its public transportation across the state. This particular investment is particularly critical for environmental justice and equity, as non-white households are almost a little bit under 2 times more likely to use public transportation, and those that use public transit are estimated to spend an extra 67% more time commuting to and from work. It's going to move us towards a zero-emission future. The bipartisan infrastructure, California is going to receive a little under $400 million over 5 years to expand its electric vehicle charging network across the state. This is going to accelerate the adoption of electric vehicles to address the climate crisis while supporting domestic manufacturing jobs. So we've got to begin to, as we do this, it's obvious, we have to use this to begin the process of dismantling and moving away from fossil fuel that continue to pollute our communities and our planet. The state of California, the ports community in California have already are well along in that process. But we've used this bill as a measure to help them by providing resources because they already have the plans, California, but also to help those states that have not really had the resources or begun to target the tremendous need to begin to phase out oil and gas. We've got to look at, the first thing is, and here many of us living in Long Beach, California don't know, we have a huge number in California of orphaned and abandoned oil and gas wells in this state. A huge number where companies either went bankrupt or walked away, didn't clean it up, left it for the public to clean up. It's a huge number. There were in California more than 5,300 oil and gas and geothermal abandoned wells, many of which pollute their neighborhoods. The bipartisan infrastructure law is going to provide $61 million to California to create jobs, to clean up and to cap these wells. These wells are, we're talking about polluting residential areas. Right now, Long Beach currently relies on money that's brought in from new wells to fund the high cost of safely capping abandoned wells, which the price tag in Long Beach alone is somewhere between $81 million and $145 million just to cap the wells that have been abandoned in the city of Long Beach. Long Beach is already moving forward to eliminating all production based upon financial factors, with wells estimated to become economically unviable by 2035. But in the meantime, oil taxes, sales, and fees still make up a significant portion of the city's budget, contributing $18.9 million in the fiscal year 2020. Relying on fossil fuel money to support our economy and clean up their mess keeps us tied, unfortunately, to the destruction of the planet. And it impacts our health, our communities, which is brought about by the fossil fuel industry. When oil prices plummeted during the pandemic, nobody drilled a new well in Long Beach, and for 18 months, there were no new wells drilled in Long Beach. But companies recently ramped up production again, and the city is now averaging 1.5 new wells per month. So we're back in the game. Thankfully, on January 28th of this year, the Long Beach Sustainable City Commission voted to draft a memo with recommendations to my dear friend Mayor Robert Garcia and the City Council that would urge them to declare a climate emergency and to halt new drilling permits in Long Beach. I'm really delighted to see that the Commission's recommendations also direct the city officials to collaborate with LA County's third-party amortization study to accelerate the phase-out of all oil operations, to increase the state's contribution to abandonment liabilities, and to identify alternative sources of revenue and options to help oil field workers transition into new careers. So Long Beach is a leader in reducing reliance on fossil fuel revenues. The City of Long Beach plans to phase out oil and gas reliance by 2035, which is 10 years before the state. And Long Beach is not alone. County of LA, the Board of Supervisors voted this in September of 2021 to ban any new drilling and phase out existing wells in the unincorporated parts of the In November, the city of Culver City became the first municipality in LA County to ban any new oil drilling. And in January, the city of LA also passed a moratorium to phase out any new urban oil and gas drilling. At the state level, Governor Newsom said California will no longer issue permits for fracking beginning in 2024 and has set a goal of ending oil extraction in California by 2045. He's also proposed new regulations banning the construction of new oil and gas wells within 3,200 feet of homes, schools, and healthcare facilities. That's how we begin. These are the kinds of legislation that we need to really build a sustainable future that we're talking about. And so we have to end our reliance on how much more time? Maybe 5 minutes more, 10 minutes? Do we
have 5 and then 10 for Q&A.
All right, let me just say, that's how we build a sustainable future, by reducing our reliance and ultimately reducing the use of harmful fossil fuels, and understanding that there's a mountain of evidence now. It's overwhelming. It's connecting fossil fuel to climate change, to environmental toxicity, to public health implications, and to environmental inequities. That's what fossil fuel leaves us. But I also want to mention briefly in the last few minutes some of the things that the bipartisan infrastructure bill, as I said before, will drastically expand high-speed internet access for Californians. As I mentioned, the digital divide affects households up and down California, from rural communities to major cities like Long Beach. The divide is caused by many factors, from the relatively high cost of broadband that has made it unaffordable for many in the urban areas, to gaps in coverage and infrastructure, and the list goes on and on of how the pandemic. Through the bipartisan infrastructure law, California will receive $100 million to help provide equitable broadband throughout the state of California. But for sustainable solutions, we must recognize that this digital divide is not solely an issue of infrastructure, that is, cables in the ground or on poles, but it's also one of affordability for some, and the lack of understanding by many on how to use this. It's one thing to build the infrastructure, it's another thing when only certain people can access it. So that's why I supported in the bipartisan infrastructure law benefits that help improve both access and enable low-income families to afford internet access. And so that is built into this bill. In California, our own state senator, Lena Gonzalez, and her colleagues in the Assembly have introduced and passed out of the state Senate the the Broadband for All Act. So we are targeting this. I think the federal government is going to be a partner with the state and with local communities to make sure we get that money to those communities that really need it. We can't move forward with the technology of the past, but reliable, affordable broadband service has to be accessible and readily available to everyone in the state, and it is not now, and so that has to be done. So I'll kind of close by saying, I want to say something a little bit more personal. As was when I was introduced 30 years ago, I made the decision to run for city council, and with the support of many of you in this room, the help of many of you, because I felt at that time my council member didn't listen to the community, didn't listen to us, didn't listen to the league, and so I decided that was what led me as a college professor to run for city council. And every day I try to recommit myself to listen to my residents, to listen to the people who come, to understand what their needs are. And I've been very much touched by the support that and the faith that people have given to me over the last 30 years. I was first elected in '92, and it's now 2022. And that's a long time. And so a few months ago, I announced that after spending a decade in Washington, that I'm not going to be running for re-election to the Congress. It's time to pass the baton. I feel really good about that. It's time to begin to rest more and to say, it's taken a lot out of me, physically. It's time to spend some more time taking care of myself. And it's also, during this journey, I've had the ability to have the pleasure of raising 2 incredible children and 4 great grandchildren. I want to spend more time with them. I want to look forward to spending my time with them, watching them grow and flourish. It's also a time to spend more time with my wife, who has been my rock, who has kind of traveled with me when I've gone to Washington, and actually took a job in Washington and here as a family physician for Kaiser, both Mid-Atlantic Kaiser and Kaiser on Southern California Kaiser. But this is not the end, even though I'm going to continue to be your champion in Washington for the rest of the year until the end of this year. I'm determined to make the most of my time. And after that, there's certainly other pages left for me to write about in my life, for me to put down. And there are other challenges I'd like to take beyond the halls of government. As Robert Frost has written, there are miles to go before I sleep. And I live my life with a deep belief that the innate goodness of our nation and our people, we are seeing that now in the world, as that we're being tested once again as a beacon of democracy, and trying to protect those other democracies throughout the world, of being supportive of that. So I just remember that all of us have to continue that struggle, and I will continue that struggle, but so do you. We all have our own ways that we're going to participate in that struggle. But I'm going to be at your side, even though. I'm going to continue the struggle, join in those issues in my community. I'm going to fight for what is right, what is good, what makes us better as a nation and as a people. And I just want to say it's been a great honor and a true privilege to represent everyone here, both in the city council, in the state legislature, and now in Congress, in the 47th Congressional District. So thank you so much for it.
First of all, I want to thank you for your newsletters. I love filling out the survey and getting the responses.
Oh, I love doing it. Sometimes it doesn't come on Friday, it us on Saturday and Sunday,
Yeah,
but you know.
okay. I can't even remember when they come in, but I do wanna ask you about the getting rid of the petroleum issue on this one. There's so many different aspects to this one, to do it. We still have people, and this is an equality issue, who are using old cars.
Yes.
That have to use fuel.
Right.
And is there something in the works for subsidizing people to be able to purchase cars that aren't going to be doing that? Because they're gonna be on the road for a long time and they need fuel.
Right, I think, that's a great thing. I'm not sure, and I will look that up, how we plan to do that. You know, the state has, I think after, 2035, I believe it is, will not be selling internal combustion engines any longer. It will only be selling either, you know, those that are fully, you know, battery electric, or maybe fuel cell technology, or anything else, zero emission technologies. So you're saying, well, what's going to happen to those older cars? How are they? Well, they're still going to be available. You know, they just, huh?
The used car is still out there that people are going to be able to purchase. They
But-
won't have new ones. People will still be able to purchase the old used cars, but they're gonna have to run on petroleum,
Right.
to get around. So eventually, people can't afford petroleum. It's gonna go up in price.
Right.
So it's kind of like this leveling game of how do we support the people who can't afford it?
Well, we have to, one of the things is that we have to increase the amount of production of electric vehicles and have the infrastructure available for everyone out there, and to lower the price for that, to develop the manufacturing in the United States, especially the infrastructure that goes into those cars, which right now we are dependent upon other countries for the production of that and for the development. We're going to have to do that. It's going to have to be a major focus of our attention. And I think you're right. As we use less, or there's less demand, that price potentially could go up in what's available. Yes.
Alan, as you likely know, France has for a long time used the bulk of its energy from nuclear, and it's done so safely. And I realize that makes it a rarity. What's your perception of the possibility of our utilizing nuclear to bridge the gap between our energy needs and our actual energy supply?
Well, I think the operative word that you've used there right now is the gap. You know, that we're going to have to figure out what are those transition fuels between a zero producing that's safe, that's healthy, and that does not, and that we have the infrastructure to do all that. I think it's a very hard sell in some parts of the country, being honest, because you know you can't. The government just can't come in and impose that. And if you think that here in California, if you try to say, let's build a new nuclear facility, there would be no support. So we have to first realize the reality of the situation, that it's a very difficult sell. People still remember Fukushima, what happened. People remember some of the dangers of it. We still, in this country, have not resolved the issue because nobody wants to take it of what we're going to do with nuclear waste. It hasn't been resolved. I don't think we're going to build any new nuclear plants, or many, until we resolve that question. Because people have to know what's going to happen. Are we just going to store the waste in the facility? That's what we're doing now, because we don't know. They wanted to use Yucca Mountain in Nevada, but the people in Nevada said, wait a second, no, you're not putting nuclear waste here in Nevada. So potentially there are some states that have said maybe you should do it. That's going to be as an interim solution. If we need to build more, that problem has to be resolved first, and states have to step up. And I'm not going to be one that's going to you know, I'm gonna look at any other option before I move towards nuclear. Doesn't mean I'm totally against it, but there are these issues that have to get resolved with nuclear. Yes?
What is the status of the oil islands off our coast here?
They're there. They were, the company that produced it, California Resources Corporation, went into bankruptcy. And so a while when the prices were low, very low, nobody knew what was going to happen. But now, as you all know, the price of oil, even though the oil that we get from those islands is not the kind that can be used for gasoline. It's heavy duty kind of oil that's used for asphalt and those kinds of things. There are not going to be any new development out there. There are not going to be any new kinds of development. But as I pointed out, they're now averaging 1.5. That's going to be up to the citizens of the city of Long Beach in terms of what happens in terms of the length of time. If in fact the Sustainability Commission has recommended no new development, no new oil wells. And so you're asking, will that become a reality? Will we say no new development? You can't just say ban, because we've already given these companies, government, a permits and licensing to drill, and we can put limits on it, but you can't take away their rights. The courts would not. But what we can do is to begin to make it less profitable, less desirable, no new drilling, ban fracking. Those are things that we can do, and I think the commission has already made recommendations in Long Beach. And so any new drilling will be up to what the citizens of Long Beach decide, and that will impact what happens out there with the oil outlets.
I was wondering, as I drive around and see wells that are not pumping, that I don't know who those oil wells actually belong to.
Either does the government frequently. That's a great, because many wells, passed ownership from one to another, and it's very hard now to trace who owned them. As we saw the difficulty that the Coastal Commission, not on those wells, but when we had what happened out in the Pacific, when that oil when we discovered oil coming up, and from that was in a company out of Texas, Louisiana, and that the ownership had passed from one company to another. Right now, the people who own these tend to be the bottom feeders. These are not the people who did the drilling, who have the money, the major companies. These are the people that have been passed on to it, who have very little resources, and if you push them, they're just going to walk away. And that's why we have all of those other things. And then we have to go to court to get the money from them. Maybe that's what we're going to have to do it. But
that was actually the question, was how in what way does the government go to the person who drilled the well and say, you're culpable?
Well, there are a couple of ways. One is when they're drilling the wells, if we know the companies, we say, you've got to put up as a bond enough money to clean this up, to cap this. We didn't do that for long. This is throughout this nation. We just didn't do that. And so we're tremendously underfunded. So when they go out of business and they walk away, there's not enough money in the pot to clean them up. So the first thing is, before we even is to clean up all the things that are out there and increase the amount of money for bonding, and to make sure that they have put up enough money if they walk away. That's the first thing. The second thing is, like in the Infrastructure Act, is to say, well, these companies have gone out of business, we're going to put money in the federal infrastructure bill to clean up those abandoned wells. And the problem is not just here. The problem is the old wells in Pennsylvania and Appalachia, where there was no money, where people just walked away from Appalachia. And so it's going to turn out that we can ask companies that are still drilling and still to put more money into it, to make sure if they want it, but it's going to take the federal government also to help do that, and that's what we did in the infrastructure act. That's why we put the money into it. Dee?
Yeah, I was stunned by what you had to say about plastics. And I realized that what I do, I put my plastic stuff
In the recyclable.
recycling and I don't know where it goes.
Most likely, it doesn't get used. Most likely, it will never get reused again. The vast majority of plastics that end up in recyclable bins never gets used. It either goes to incinerators, which we have that incinerator here in Long Beach. It gets, unfortunately, gets dumped into the ocean.
Is there anything we could do in Long Beach to say we want to stop buying plastic?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, well, plastic.
I think
yes,
the commission, I
stop.
think the city is struggling with that, with
Yeah.
that issue. Right now, that's exactly what the city is. This issue, is every city in the country is now beginning to focus. Nobody saw this as a problem. This was something that was, you know, if it ended up in the ocean, it ended up far away, or if it ended up, if the only problem was what you saw on our beaches, but now we realize that every single day, or every single week, you eat a plastic's worth of a card. You have a credit card. You eat that amount of plastic, you take that amount of plastic into your body every single week. And what's even worse than that, those plastics break down into small microplastics, and we're now going through the period of trying to recycle all the water that we have, to go through our sanitation districts, to take water and to reuse it, and it's clogging that system up because there are all
So
these
we've been
plastics.
personally fried of not.
We're just learning
not
about
buy stuff in
the scope,
plastic
yeah.
and
The
use
thing
it.
is, we've got to set standards, we've got to increase the standards. If we're gonna use it, we can only use, we've got to not allow certain, we've got to, this throwaway society has to end. We can't be doing that, we can't be creating products that just get used once. That is not gonna work. We just have to ban those at a national level. And the tremendous amount of costs that it takes to clean up, it's been on the backs of cities and counties. We've got to change that to the people who produce the plastics. They're going to pay for it, and they're going to design them, the recycling things, and we're going to be under the control of EPA, and we're going to make sure that everything is done to protect the public health, because the people who are paying the most in terms of healthcare costs are the people in the poorest communities in this country. That's who's paying the price for the plastics in this country.
So, related to what they had to say about nuclear and
Yes.
cars, is there anything in the the bills to, so for the batteries, when they.
To do what?
For the batteries for the electric cars, that's such a high, environmentally destructive, it can cause a lot of pollution, so is there money in the bills so that, or plans what to do with the batteries? And then I have another question. It seems like.
I think that automobile companies are going to be asked to recycle all their own batteries. It's going to be done through the people that use it. Just like I said with plastics, that, there's extended producer responsibility. I think we're going to see the same thing there with batteries. If you put it into a car, you've got to be responsible for it.
So now, another question is.
Although that's not in statute everywhere. I'm just saying that's the model that we're going to end up doing, but that's not in statute. You have touched on something that in most places it is not at all in statute. It's going to go, it's going to end up being dumped into the trash batteries, and it's going to become somebody else's problem. Well, that can't be. We don't have, that's not a sustainable model.
So the other thing, it seems like people who resisted against environmental problems seems to be softening a little bit. Do you see that in the people you legislate with? And if so, how long do you think it'll take them to actually realize that we have environmental problems?
Well, that's a great question, and I don't have the total answer to that. But what you're saying is, what you're asking me is, has the denial of climate change? Has it reached a critical moment, and that more and more people are coming to appreciate, or at least admit, that that's true, that yes, that is happening. Now, are many people willing to invest money? Will people, and that's no. The big bill that really dealt with having this country meet its overall goals was the Build Back Better Act. And that's where there was almost $600 billion just for this issue put into that, to figure out how are we going to deal with, how do we electrify, how do we build that infrastructure, what are we going to do with those batteries, where is the infrastructure, how are we going to deal with all of these. That passed out of the House, and Mr. Manchin said, no way are we going to move in that direction, and that bill died in the Senate. Because what you're saying is there has to be a commitment now in the federal government, and it's more and more. It's still very hard for people who don't believe in government, and let's be honest, there are a lot of people now in government who don't believe that government has an answer. Now that, it just is, and I'm not putting them down, I'm just saying it's a different philosophy than where I come from. I believe there has to be accountability, there has to be transparency, and what we've seen, there has to be equity. How we spend our money has to be done to those that are most impacted, and it has to be, we can't waste it. Having said that, I still believe we have to deal with this by providing the resources to solve this. We have, this is a huge problem in the country, and while there are some people who say, yes, I believe climate change, I've been exposed to the hurricanes, to the sea level rise, and you say, will you vote for the Build Back Better? No. Will you put that money into this? No. And so that's where we are, and you will see that will become in the elections in 2022 and 2024, not so much in California, but in the rest of the country. There are a lot of people that want to go back to the way it used to be.
But isn't California able to do some of this on its own?
Absolutely, it's doing some of it, but it can't do it all on its own. It's too big a problem that one state. Everybody has to be involved, from the individual level, to the city level, to the state level, to the federal government. You can't, we're talking about a transformation of our economy, a transformation of the way we do business. And no one person, or one group, or one city, or one state can do it all alone. And the federal government can't do it all alone without having partners at every level. But as I say, we did at the federal level. That's what the Build Back Better Act was primarily about. And it's not going to happen. So one of my great disappointments.
I think we're going to have to leave it there. I want to make sure we leave time for our other speakers.
Yes. Thank you all. That's yours. I think this is yours and mine.
So we always like to thank our speakers, and we figured you probably didn't need another Starbucks gift card to take with you. So we are giving you a one-year membership, an honorary membership into the League of Women Voters. In the spirit of reducing waste, we didn't print up a fancy certificate, but we will contact your office and get all of that. So thank you very much.
I am going to introduce our second speaker for today. I just have to say before I do that, when I look at the biographies of our two speakers today, I'm absolutely humbled by the amount of service to their communities that they have provided over their lifetimes. It's really an inspiration for me. So our next speaker is Sharon Weissman. She was a senior advisor to Long Beach Mayor Robert Garcia. She is currently nominated by him and approved by the City Council unanimously. She is the Vice President of the Long Beach Board of Harbor Commissioners, who set the policy and run the harbor for us here in Long Beach. Her 6-year term began in July of 2020, and she was elected vice president of the commission in July of 2021. The commission provides policy direction and oversight for the port's capital improvement, which is a plan to invest about $1.6 billion over the next 10 years to upgrade port facilities, protect the environment, increase revenue, and enhance competitiveness, which is what we want our speaker to be telling us all about, so I'll save that for her. In the meantime, though, besides serving on various commission special purpose standing committees, she also represents the port on national and international trade missions and in a bunch of port-related leadership organizations. She was the senior advisor to the mayor from July of 2014 and then transportation secretary beginning in 2017 until her retirement from the city in June of 2020. She served as Mayor Garcia's liaison to the arts community, the Long Beach Public Library, support groups, and sister cities organizations, and did a lot with state and city regulations, developing and implementing training opportunities, working on issues of sustainability, and so on. Before that, she had developed her background in public policy, serving as chief of staff to the former California State Senator and Assembly member, Jenny Oropesa, and while she was working with Ms. Oropesa, who chaired the Assembly Committees on Budget and Transportation and the Senate Committee on Revenue and Taxation, obviously that contributed greatly to her knowledge and expertise in those areas. Prior to that, she was the director of the Richard and Karen Carpenter Performing Arts Center at Cal State Long Beach, the station manager of Cal State Long Beach's jazz radio station, and an instructor in the university in the fields of radio, TV, and film. Currently, and along with all of that, she is a board member and former president of the Long Beach Public Library Foundation, a former board member of the Arts Council for Long Beach, the Long Beach Symphony, Sister Cities of Long Beach, and a former chair of the Long Beach Fair Housing Foundation. I am pleased to introduce Sharon Weissman.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me here today. I have to say, and you won't be surprised now when I say this, that any day that starts out in the library is a good day. So thank you. You know, the other thing, I know he had to leave, but I have to say, before I get into these remarks, that I first became aware of the pollution issues at the port when a second district council member by the name of Alan Lowenthal started talking about why we needed to cover the coke piles. And that was when I first became aware that there was a lot to do with the port, and you'll see in my remarks, we've done a whole lot, so I'm really proud of that. But nice to be here to talk about sustainability the day after Earth Day. It's although as many of the questions to Alan and Alan's comments pointed out, we need to do something to help our Earth every day and not just Earth Day. So anyway, but I'm pleased to be here, and I of course have to extend greetings on behalf of all the harbor commissioners, Steve Neal, Bobby Olvera, Bonnie Lowenthal, and Frank Colonna. And so they've asked me to send you their greetings, and I'm happy to do so. So as I'm sure most of you have heard, we've been pretty busy at the Port of Long Beach. And I'm going to mainly talk about sustainability and infrastructure and the environment and the port, but I do want to give you some information about the port before I start on that, so you can put it all in context and understand what we're doing to create a sustainable future here in Long Beach. In 2021, we moved 9.38 million TEUs, and I have to tell you, when I first joined the Harbor Commission, I can't tell you how much time I spent looking up acronyms and initialisms, and I'll still say, what? And so, in fact, when I was going through these remarks, I thought, no one's going to know what that is, and so I have some explainers. But a TEU is a 20-foot equivalent container. And so most containers nowadays are 40 feet and not 20 feet, but the industry still uses the 20-foot equivalent. It's a standard container metric. And so our volume is up 15.67% over the year 2020. The one other thing I want to say is So we have 3 other port employees, I'm not an employee, but 3 port employees in the room, so I'm gonna depend on them to keep me honest if I say anything that isn't right. So anyway, now, and I learned in doing a little research and preparing to talk to you today, that if you put all of those containers end to end, they would wrap around the equator 1.5 times. The San Pedro Bay Port Complex, that is not easy to say, which is what we call both the LA and Long Beach ports together, moved 20.1 million TEUs in 2021. These are the top 5 U.S. container ports, and as you can see, we are the 2nd busiest port in the nation. And certainly one of the 2 ports that's been most in the news in the past, year and a half now, probably. It's been a long time. We just had our busiest March ever with 863,156 TEUs, which is up 2.7% from the previous record we had set in March 2021. And March has followed the busiest January and February we have ever had, and that has all added up to our busiest quarter overall, breaking the previous record set during the 4th quarter of 2020 by 54,649 TEUs. So as you're all aware, there's been quite the supply chain surge. Who ever thought they would hear the term supply chain on the news every night? Or I don't know how many of you are NPR geeks like I am. And wait, don't tell me when they start talking about the supply chain, I think, we're in the news. So anyway, but during this supply chain surge, our terminal operators, our dock workers, our cargo owners, they've still continued to work to reduce the backlog on terminals. We have not started our container dwell fee. We haven't actually started charging it, but we've seen a reduction of more than 40% of loaded containers since we established it. And that's important because if those containers are sitting there on the dock, then you can't unload other containers from the ship, and that's why it's really important to get those containers moving. Empty containers are also being reduced, and that helps too. It's just this congestion issue. And so I'm happy to say, are now down in the 30s in terms of the number of container ships waiting or on the way to the port complex, and that is down from a high of 109 earlier in January of this year. Late last year, we began to allow ships leaving Asia, and that's our major trading partner, to take a number, slow steam to the port complex, and wait their turn about 150 miles off coast. So you all saw at one point all those ships sitting off our coast. Now there are still ships, but they're out there, and that's because that's better for our air quality here in the greater Long Beach region. This eased at anchor crowding, improved navigational safety, and most importantly, it reduced coastal emissions, because that was really our main concern. So I do want to give thanks to the Pacific Merchant Shipping Association, the Pacific Maritime Association, and the Marine Exchange for their collaborative efforts to improve safety and diminish the impact of emissions off our coast. The other thing we're really proud of at the port is in May 2021, we initiated a free waterfront COVID-19 vaccination program for ship's crews that were calling at both the Port of LA and the Port of Long Beach. Thank you. Yeah, these seafarers were not getting the vaccines in their home country, so we were glad to do that here. And I'm also happy to tell you it's still going on, and thanks to the Long Beach Department of Health and Human Services and the International Longshore and Warehouse Union, the National Guard, the Long Beach Fire Department, the Marine Terminals, and the International Seafarers Center, we have all worked together to continue to vaccinate workers, and we recently reached and surpassed 10,000 vaccinations for seafarers, and the program also dispenses not just seafarers, but also ILWU workers and everyone who's working at the port. And the program, we're also giving booster shots for those who've previously been vaccinated. So now, let's talk about why we're here today, which is talk about our Green Port Policy. And we adopted the Green Port Policy in 2005. And you can see on the slide what it is we do at the port. And today the Port of Long Beach, I'm very proud to say, is an industry leader and pioneer in environmental sustainability for seaports. We are known worldwide for our industry-leading clean air, water, and sediment programs. And we are certainly the greenest port in this country. And as I said, I'm very proud of that. So Congressman Lowenthal mentioned our Clean Air Action Plan, and it was adopted along with the city in 2006. Let's see, another port employee, which is the room is. So anyway, in 2017, the boards of harbor commissioners for both the ports of Long Beach and Los Angeles approved an updated Clean Air Action Plan with new zero emission goals for cargo handling equipment by 2030 and for our truck fleet by 2035. And we are dedicated to enhancing the environment. We've cut emissions from vessels, trucks, trains, and cargo handling equipment. We have dramatically reduced key air pollutants, and these numbers are a result of our most recent annual emissions inventory, which covered through 2020. The 2021 inventory will be due, we will get in the fall. And so, of course, keep in mind that like newer trucks, new ships are cleaner than old ships. And one of the good news about all this congestion and all the money those carriers have been making is that there are currently 785 ships on order by ocean carriers. And so we're going to see a massive changeover in coming years to newer ships. And many of those ships are larger. I don't know if you're aware that container ships just keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And Long Beach is a port that can handle large container ships. Not all ports can. And so we have every reason to hope and believe and encourage that those newer, cleaner ships, a disproportionate number of them, will be calling on the Port of Long Beach. That order represents about 25% of the world's existing fleet capacity. So, now, in fact, the most recent air emissions inventory found that in 2020, the port achieved and surpassed all of our 2023 emission reduction targets for diesel particulate matter, nitrogen oxides, sulfur oxides. And so that's 3 years ahead of schedule of what we promised in our CAP, our Clean Air Action Plan. Our environmental initiatives have made dramatic and documented gains in cutting air pollution, restoring water quality in the harbor, protecting wildlife and natural habitats, recycling and reusing construction materials. And I just want to pause there because I want to point that out. I didn't know this before I joined the Harbor Commission, that we recycle a huge majority of construction. So if we are redoing a road, the asphalt will be recycled. And so I'm very proud of that. We are nurturing groundbreaking and new clean technologies that are and we're showing ports around the world how to reduce the impacts of their operations. In addition to what we're doing on the waterfront, the port has worked for more than 10 years to fund community-based projects to reduce the harmful effects of port operations. So we have provided grants for air filters for classrooms, mobile health screening, asthma education programs for port area residents, and tree plantings. And I'm just going to digress here just a moment to say we also have a wonderful community sponsorship program. So if the League of Women Voters, or if you're involved in any other groups that do programs, and you have the opportunity to maybe promote the port a little by putting its logo on your invitations for events or on your programs, I would encourage you to apply for one of our community sponsorship grants. Our next round opens up in September, I think, and so if you want to be on our email list to get the announcement of that, give either me or Mario. I should introduce Mario Gonzalez, who's with the Harbor Commission staff. Give one of us your card and we'll be sure that you get on that mailing list. All right, back to my script. Here at the port, we're demonstrating that good jobs and economic development don't have to come at the cost of environmental sustainability. And I know you wanted to hear about our infrastructure. So our zero emission goal for trucks and cargo handling equipment will help us achieve our greenhouse gas reduction goals. At every container terminal at the port, there is work in developing, using, and moving towards zero emission technology demonstrations and other clean air projects. We have hybrid rubber tire gantry cranes and fully electric gantry cranes. We have zero emission and near zero emission yard tractors. We thank the marine terminal operators and ILWU for joining us in moving towards the zero emission future. And we also, of course, thank the California Air Resources Board and California Energy Commission for funding assistance. So thank you for applying for those grants. A big thank you to the terminal operators who are investing on their own for new equipment. And we're doing the same with our own fleet of vehicles. Our green fleet policy, which was initiated in 2006 and updated in 2021, requires that when the port buys a new vehicle, it's the cleanest one that meets our performance requirements. For example, in one demonstration, this BYD yard hostlers are being tested at our ITS Pier G terminal. So we do a lot of pilot programs to try and get zero emission equipment. But I have to say, it isn't only our air quality that we're improving. In a recent survey of our harbor waters, our marine biologists in 2021 confirmed that we have quite the thriving ecosystem. So you can see the increase. This is one of my favorite slides. The waters of the Port of Long Beach are a thriving marine habitat. We show amazing biodiversity in our surveys. There are now 60% more species of plants and animals in our harbor than there were just a decade ago. And the fish and kelp are abundant, so you often find sea lions in the harbor. And I should say at this point, if you've never taken a tour of the port of the harbor, we just have started up our harbor tours again. And so if you go to our website, polb.com, you can probably somewhere easily find the place to click on and sign up for a harbor tour. They're really fun and interesting. All right, so the ports of Long Beach and Los Angeles have a joint clean truck program, which has a goal of zero emission drayage. So I gotta stop here because who knows what drayage is? Drayage is a fancy word we use for moving freight to or from a ship by truck. So we have a zero emission drayage program at the two ports. And the goal is, as we've said, to be zero emission in our trucks by 2035. So we just launched our clean truck rate, which will supercharge the deployment of zero emission trucks and infrastructure at the nation's largest port complex. As of April 1st, cargo owners are paying $20 each for most loaded containers hauled by drayage trucks in and out of the container terminals at both our ports. Exemptions from the rate are provided for loaded containers hauled by zero emission trucks and under limited circumstances, near zero emission low NOx trucks. The clean truck rate was created to help support the changeover to cleaner trucks and is expected to generate $90 million in the first year alone, or about $45 million per port. Part of this is to push to build the charging and refueling stations that will be needed when more trucks like these start calling on our ports. And now, a little more about our infrastructure programs. Our capital investments, which started decades ago, are now proving to be well planned and beneficial to these objectives. And of course, I have to give credit to the Harbor Commission that came before me. I'm fairly new. But the need for addressing an increased cargo demand did not just appear with the pandemic. The plans were formulated years ago to meet this increasing need. For the past decade, the port has been deliberate in addressing the need for long-term planning. In 2021, after 10 years of construction, we reached substantial completion of the Long Beach Container Terminal, or LBCT. It's our most advanced container terminal with nearly all zero emission operations. And I have to tell you, this is amazing. I've taken 2 tours of it, and every time still, I'm fascinated, and it's incredible to watch this automated terminal. The terminal features driverless guided vehicles, and there's one right there, that take containers between the ships and the stacking cranes. And these electric vehicles run on batteries, and the batteries are changed out and recharged on a regular basis in an automated battery exchange building on the terminal. And so when the battery needs to be charged, the vehicle, again automated, goes to the battery exchange building. A little crane takes the old battery off, puts it in a charging port, puts a new one on, and they go back to work. So it's all very high tech and amazing. And we're in the process of building the second battery exchange building right now, because if for some reason one of them stopped working, we certainly wouldn't want this terminal to shut down. So we do have some backup. In February, the port broke ground on a new microgrid demonstration project at our Joint Command and Control Center, which is the hub of our security operations. The microgrid will use an array of solar panels and batteries to provide energy resilience for the port's security center and the port's pilots building, while enhancing air quality by delivering clean power for daily operations. The project also, of course, reduces our reliance on diesel generators to produce electricity during outages. And we all know, unfortunately, in California, sometimes that happens. Over the next year, we will invest $1.5 billion on improvements to our rail system to make it possible for a greater share of the cargo moving through the port to go what we call on-dock rail, meaning rail that's right next to our terminals. This reduces truck trips, improves efficiency, and lessens environmental impacts even as we handle more and more cargo. In December, we were awarded a $52.3 million grant from the U.S. Department of Transportation's Maritime Administration to move ahead with the first projects on our rail program centerpiece, the Pier B on-dock rail support facility. Pier B will provide our terminals with a facility where they can send smaller segments to join full-size trains. And construction begins next year on Pier B. It's a vital piece of the port's ongoing rail infrastructure capital improvement program aimed at shifting more cargo to rail. And that is one of the goals of our 2017 update of our Clean Air Action Plan. Other projects that have to do with rail is our double track access from Pier G to Pier J project. It adds a second rail line running approximately 9,000 feet long that enables 4 terminals in the port's South Basin area to simultaneously handle arriving and departing trains. And the recently completed $35 million project will be dedicated this coming week. Another project is the 4th track at Ocean Boulevard project will add another line to the crucial rail route in the port's construction. This $25 million project is scheduled to begin next month. But wait, there's more. Another rail project is the Terminal Island Y realignment, and that will start construction in March of next year. It's a $40 million project which will reduce switching conflicts by adding a new lead track and 2 new storage tracks. And for this Terminal Island Y project, we received a $14.5 million grant from the U.S. Department of Transportation. Now, you're probably familiar with our new bridge, which is not the Bridge to Nowhere. It has not officially been named yet, but the state legislature at some point, we believe, will consider a proposal to call it the Long Beach International Gateway Bridge. The new bridge offers an additional 50 feet of vertical clearance, which, when we demolish the old bridge, will allow large ships to more easily transit under the bridge. And demolition of the Gerald Desmond Bridge will start this year, and much of the bridge material will be recycled.
How are you gonna tear that thing down?
So my understanding, and here's where any of you can check me if I'm wrong, is sometime soon they're going to start by closing that portion of the port, the entranceway, for I want to say, was it 3 days, 5 days, for a very few number of days, and take down the middle span, which will mean at that point, even though the whole bridge has not yet been removed, the larger ships will be able to more easily come in, and then they'll take down the rest, piece by piece. It's not something we can blow up, although that would be fun to see. There's a brand new bridge right next to it. So of course we needed to build the new bridge before we could take down the old bridge, and so that's how they're gonna take it down. It is. And then a few other things. Our new bridge includes a separated 1.5 mile long bicycling and walking path. Yep. Along the south edge of the bridge. It's officially named the Mark Bixby Memorial Bicycle Pedestrian Path. And the route will offer spectacular views of the San Pedro Bay, the Port of Long Beach, and much of the city's coastline. And although the bridge is open, the bike walk path has not yet been opened. It will open once we finish the Ocean Boulevard connector, which will provide a safe and convenient connection to the Bixby Path from downtown Long Beach. And it should be completed in October of this year. And along with the Bixby Path and the Pier J Path, we're adding to the city's bicycle network right here in the port. So the last thing I'm going to talk about is I-710, and I spend more time than you would ever imagine in meetings about the I-710, and Kim Ritter has been in some of them, and so I'm not going to talk a long time about the 710, although I could, but I certainly answer any questions. So I'm sure you're all aware that the 710 corridor is a critical artery for moving people and goods between the San Pedro Bay ports and up north to the 60 and to LA. So Caltrans and the Metro Board in 2021 suspended the environmental process for the 710 South Corridor Freeway project due to concerns that the project would not meet the desired outcomes for air quality, equity, mobility, and sustainability. Also, the EPA rejected the EIR. And they rejected the EIR because they will reject the EIR for any project in the United States that is in a non-attainment area in terms of air quality, which we are in Los Angeles, in the Los Angeles basin, that would increase vehicle miles traveled. So the Metro Board has directed their staff to re-engage local communities and regional stakeholders in a process that will develop a new approach to delivering benefits and reduce disparities for communities adjacent to the 710. So the task force, of which I serve on and am on the coordinating committee, will reevaluate the needs of the corridor, develop multimodal strategies to meet these needs, identify potential projects and programs in the short and long term based on those strategies, and create a prioritized investment plan to allow both Metro and Caltrans, working with local, state, and federal agencies, to implement recommended projects and programs. And what that means is there are some projects that do not include adding another lane to the freeway that could help reduce some of those bottlenecks. Because I think we all realize, in addition to the frustration of sitting on the 710 and the wasted time sitting there, that trucks and cars idling on the freeway obviously are creating more air emissions than they need to if the freeway was a little freer flowing. You know, that freeway is probably never going to be going 60 miles an hour during rush hour. But by making the freeway safer, by perhaps improving some of the on-ramps and off-ramps, it's because on an average freeway, half of the bottlenecks and slowdowns are caused by accidents. it's not just the number of cars, it's the accident and trucks, it's the accidents. So by making the freeway a little safer, improving some of the on-ramps and off-ramps, in addition to the other benefits, more, putting more bike lanes along the freeway and having opportunities for healthcare for more people. Anyway, the freeway could move a little more swiftly and fewer trucks would be getting off and going into the neighborhood. So there's still a lot of work that can be done that don't include widening the freeway. But I will stop there, so there's time for questions. I thank you so much for this. I've enjoyed it. Yes?
I just want to encourage anybody, if you get the opportunity to go on that tour. I went on one this week, I guess it was. Last week I was on the tour, and it's just fascinating. It's been 3 years since I've seen what was going on the port, and that was wonderful. And that J terminal with the automation, just fantastic.
The LBCT is an incredible terminal to see. So.
The other thing is on the 710, if you got any work on that, the signage is terrible. It's so easy to get lost.
Yeah.
Getting on, if you accidentally get off at the wrong place, just trying to get back on again is unnerving. I think with the new bridge in, it will help, but it was just impossible to get around.
One of the things we've talked about at the port in terms of the 710 is not just the things I've mentioned. We've talked about improved sign, that we're putting forward some ideas as well. We've talked about improved signage. Talked about making the freeway more attractive. It's one of the most unattractive freeways. You drive on these other freeways, they have art on their sound walls, or they have, vegetation, which not only can make it more attractive, but can trap pollutants. So there's lots of work that can be done to improve that freeway. So thank you. Yes? Oh, no. Yes?
I was gonna say, I travel that freeway all the time, lighting. It's one of the darkest freeways in LA.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
What about the Alameda Corridor and more trains?
So the Alameda Corridor, I don't know if you're all familiar with it. It's a rail line that's in some places is in a trench to alleviate congestion that goes from the near the ports to the to Hobart Yard in downtown LA. And this is a question we get asked a lot: is why aren't more containers going on the Alameda Corridor? And that's part of what I didn't say, that all these rail projects will make it easier to get more cargo onto the Alameda Corridor. And so, the first thing we need to realize is that not every container will go by train. A lot of containers, of course, are going somewhere locally. Most trucks that get on the 710 are not going all the way up to the 60. They're getting off before. And so they're local deliveries. And they're going to warehouses in this area. The other issue right now is it's just not as easy to build trains at the port as it could be. And so that's all these projects. By the time all these projects are done, and the first section of Pier B will open in 2024. So even though the whole project isn't done till 2032, phase 1 opens in 2024. And that will allow us to double the number of trains coming out of the port that we have now. By the time Pier B is done, we will be able to put 7.6 million containers more each year on a train that right now are perhaps ending up on the 710. So we're working on it. Yes?
To what do they attribute the increase in diversity of biology in the marina waters?
The ships are cleaner, and we've that's on our part and the carrier's parts, is that there is, as I'm sure you're aware, like cruise ships used to just dump their waste into the waters. And I assume container ships used to do the same thing. And now, of course, that is no longer allowed. You can't do that. And so the water is much cleaner than it used to be. And that's why we find the plants and the marine life is thriving, I won't say better than ever before, because I'm sure 200 years ago it was better. But that's the major change. Well, thank you so much. I really enjoyed this. I appreciate it.
too for showing up on a Saturday. We also want to gift you with a membership in the league. You will find us a group of passionate advocates for voting and voting rights, and also a big collection of NPR nerds as well. So.
All right. I've been to all. I've come as a, just as a member of the audience. I love the league. I've been involved in politics a long time, not necessarily nonpartisan politics, but politics a long time. So I'm very grateful for the work that the league does. Thank you.
Excellent.
Thank you.
So, the last thing that we want to do, we need one of those QR codes. The last thing we want to do is to introduce to you a document that the Sustainability Committee put together this year. And we sent it all out to you the first week of December, in the middle of COVID, in the middle of Christmas, and we got no response to it whatsoever, and we're not surprised because everybody was busy with other things. But what we sent out was a home sustainability guide. And if you opened it, you would find that there are, what we wanted was that you would have, if you had questions about plastics or, whatever, that room by room in your house, you would have ideas for ways to cut down on plastics and be more sustainable. For example, the bathroom, use bar soap, use refillable containers, check bathroom products for microplastics, choose towels that are 100% cotton, preferably organic. How about the clothes closet? Think before you buy. There's that whole concept of fast fashion where we buy clothes, throw them out after 3 months, and buy more clothes. So looking for sustainable brands. Find a good tailor to repair your clothes and keep them in good order. In the garage, recharge your batteries. Can you use biofuels on your lawnmower? Are there hand tools that are rechargeable batteries? So we've got all of these in this guide. And rather than publish them, this is the only one we published, there is a QR code over on the table. Now I'm sure you're all, if you've gone to a restaurant in the last year and a half, you've used a QR code. So take a picture of this and it will take you to the link where you will have this document. Now, the other thing the committee wants to do is to challenge you. So take a look at it and make a commitment about 1 or 2 things that you're going to change. I did this starting in December. I now use a deodorant that comes in a reusable container, so I just take out that stick and put in a new one. What are some of the other? Oh, I found a shampoo that I like that lathers, that's a bar. So little changes. All of us can make little changes, and those add up to a lot. And what we're going to do is by July, when we have our meeting, we're going to ask for what ideas you've implemented. If you've got new suggestions you want to put in here, we will update this and keep it as a living document. And maybe we'll even do something like raffle off a gift certificate to a local restaurant. You'll have to just go online to get the link. If for the most creative idea, or maybe just a draw from all the names of people who submitted ideas. So make this a living document and tell us. We'll be asking for your input. Tell us what you're doing to make those little changes in your household, and there might be some rewards down the way. You'll never know.
I'm going to interject just a little bit. For those of you that are watching this on video and not necessarily here, we will have that link on our website, on our sustainability actual page. So you'll have a link to this so that you can see it on the website.
Thank you, Lisa. I always forget about the website. Any questions about our sustainability guide? Go ahead.
I just glanced at the beginning of it, so I was kind of excited because my first thing was, oh God,
Oh, here we go again, right.
But when I opened it, I mean, it's really helpful. It has these little, all PowerPoints. You don't have to read through paragraphs.
Right.
Anyway, but I don't remember, do you recommend or have you, I don't necessarily recommend, but like for bar shampoo, I mean, I've never heard of it.
So the one that I found, I tried about 5 or 6 different ones, and I found one from Wirecutter. They recommended a brand. We can put it in the guide the next time we publish it, but if you look up Wirecutter bar shampoo, you can find the one that I found. And she strongly recommended it. It lathers really nicely. It's nice. Yes?
I just want to recommend there's shops like BYO Long Beach that, where you go and refill your containers, and they have very nice products. I haven't tried their bar shampoo, but they have several different kinds of things like
Right.
that, and household cleaners and cloths. It's really nice.
There's all kinds of stuff like that. I also found a website called grove.com, and they are plastic neutral by the end of this year, no new plastic, and plastic free by the end of 2025. That's their commitment. So I'm doing business with them on a lot of products. So, and there's other websites that we can recommend. There's other things in here. We have a sustainability section on our website. Check it out. In the meantime, thank you all for coming on behalf of the Sustainability Committee.